Former President Trump's second impeachment trial will shift gears today, with his defense attorneys taking center stage to make a case against convicting Mr. Trump of incitement of insurrection. This follows, of course, an emotional and visually striking presentation of last month's deadly Capitol attack from House impeachment managers over the past 2 days. However, most Senate Republicans have indicated that they do not support impeachment proceedings and will likely vote to acquit the former president. So to break down yesterday's arguments and what we can expect this afternoon, let's bring in CBS News legal expert and analyst Rikki Klieman, one of our favorites. Rikki, very good to have you here. So, impeachment managers focused on providing a clear link between the former president's words and actions of the violent mob that stormed the Capitol. How effectively did they convey that argument that without Mr. Trump's encouragement, this probably wouldn't happen? And also, you know, yesterday there was a focus on what he did afterwards, whether or not he was remorseful, and why was that important as well?
The job of the impeachment managers was certainly to connect the dots. That was critical. So it had to be from the words of President Trump directly into the minds and then the actions of the rioters. And what they did was really quite smart yesterday. They went to the rioters, the domestic terrorists, the insurrectionists themselves. So we heard their words. We watched what they did as they told the police officers that they were there because they had been invited by President Trump. That they even had a video where one of the rioters had a megaphone and was actually repeating to the crowd what Donald Trump was tweeting at the time. So you had the buildup of 6 months of activity on the part of Donald Trump that is about calling the election a fraud. He would only lose if it was rigged, and going through the election, and then the increase in his rhetoric to, as the impeachment manager said, to get his supporters angry. And as each event occurred, the theory of the case of the impeachment managers is that but for Donald Trump's words and actions going back 4 months and culminating in his speech on January 6th, where he told this group to march on the Capitol, that if he had not done any of this, if he had simply accepted the will of the people in electing Joe Biden as their next president, that this insurrection could have never possibly occurred. As to the second part of your question about remorse, it's really important for the impeachment managers to try to get into the hearts and minds of these Republican senators and say, how do we know that he is not sorry? And the reason we know is, again, because of his own language. The statements he made in the video, calling these people special people, telling them that he loved them. The fact that he watched and knew what was happening in real time and continued to tweet to target Mike Pence. And the fact that when it was all over, he still did not express remorse in any way, shape, or form. So in essence, he was happy or pleased or satisfied that the Capitol had been defiled for the first time since the War of 1812.
So, Rikki, the prosecution laid out this pattern of behavior from the former president. They say that he's openly stoked or excused political violence among his supporters since launching his first presidential bid back in 2016. Lead House impeachment manager Jamie Raskin cited armed protesters at the Michigan State House as a preview of what was to come. I want to play a bit of that.
When responding to extremist plots in Michigan, Trump showed he knew how to use the power of a mob to advance his political objectives. This Trump-inspired mob may indeed look familiar to you. Confederate battle flags, MAGA hats, weapons, camo army gear, just like the insurrectionists who showed up and invaded this chamber on January 6th. The siege of the Michigan State House was effectively a state-level dress rehearsal for the siege of the U.S. Capitol that Trump incited on January 6th.
So here's my question, Rikki. You're seeing already, and I expect that we will see this today, Republicans and the president's defense using videos and transcripts and newspaper articles of Democrats or others who are not supportive of President Trump, using language like fight like hell, using language that says, you know, I will fight every single day and you should too if you want X, Y, and Z. I thought it was interesting that Congressman Raskin, in rebutting the argument of free speech in the First Amendment, said the First Amendment does not create some superpower immunity. Explain to our audience the difference between President Biden saying, I will always fight like hell for the American people, and the language that the president used, which then, according to the House managers, his supporters and those who rallied at the Capitol on January 6th took as a directive to overrun, to sack the U.S. Capitol, to roam through the halls of Congress looking for lawmakers or even the Vice President of the United States to do them harm, as opposed to the language that is sometimes used by politicians when they're on the stump.
The language used by politicians on the stump does often say, fight like hell, go in and declare your rights, you know, fight for what you need. We've heard that since time immemorial. That's metaphorical. We all know that. So what is the distinction, which is what Jamie Raskin and the House managers were trying to show and to try to blunt the defense, which was obvious what the defense was going to do from the very beginning, was to take videos, press clippings, words, perhaps tweets of Democrats who are saying, in essence, the same words, but not with the same intent. What you had here was a former president who was not satisfied with the election results and who really tried, through his own language, to get his supporters whipped up to a frenzy over a period of months, not just that day, to be able to really take away the underpinnings of democracy. That is to stop the count of the electoral votes, to actually interfere with a lawful process in Congress that has to do with the peaceful transition of power. There has never been a president or an office holder or seeker who, in the history of this republic, who has attempted to gin up his followers or her followers, to get them to march on the Capitol to stop a process from happening while it is happening. So I think there is clearly a distinction. Now, the defense is going to say, hey, wait. Let's look at the words of his speech on January 6th. He did say peacefully once. That's not debatable. It's in the text of the speech. But he did say fight 15 times. And it wasn't just that day. That day, that speech creates, according to the House managers, the direction and the incitement and the intent to have his people literally go after the Capitol, which takes us back to what you just showed about the dress rehearsal that happened in Michigan. Donald Trump was not displeased about what happened in Michigan, and we know that because of the expressions that he used after it happened. So what the Democrats have said is, look, this is speech that is exactly rising to the level of a high crime or misdemeanor. Remember, this is an impeachment proceeding. It's political. It's not a criminal proceeding. So is this type of speech, this type of conduct, going back over 6 months, does it rise to the level of this high crime? And of course, Jamie Raskin's point is, if this doesn't, if inciting an insurrection does not rise to the level of impeachment, what does?
Yeah, and you know, to your point, Rikki, I would suggest that one of the key differences is the outcome. If Representative Maxine Waters says fight like hell and no one actually starts to break out into a fight, then her words did not incite anything. But clearly, you know, it's a different outcome here. We saw what happened at the Capitol, and part of what the what was being argued, particularly by Congressman Ted Lieu, is that these words could be used again in the future to incite something similar. I want to play some of what he had to say yesterday.
It doesn't take a prosecutor to understand that President Trump was not showing remorse. He was showing defiance. He was telling us that he would do this again. You know, I'm not afraid of Donald Trump running again in 4 years. I'm afraid he's going to run again and lose, because he can do this again.
So I suppose this is part of what I heard being called a pre-buttal, a kind of rebuttal for what the expectation is that the president's lawyers will argue, in part that he's already out of office, so this process is a waste of time. What do you make of the argument?
I want to look at what Ted Lieu said in order to answer your question. You know, I've always said, both as a trial lawyer and as a legal analyst, that there's always a moment in a trial. There's one moment that you go, aha. And you know that that is the key moment in the trial that takes your brain and makes it go, oh my goodness, this is it. And for me, that moment was Ted Lieu saying, I'm not afraid of his running again. I'm afraid of his running again and losing. Because what Ted Lieu and the impeachment managers are arguing is that, senators, you better wake up, because this could happen again if you acquit this man. That means that for the rest of the time that you are in this Capitol, that Donald Trump or someone like Donald Trump, who gets upset that they may not win or did not win an election, that they can come gunning for you. And I think that that was the most powerful moment for me in this trial. So I think that what the Republicans are going to do is have to search their conscience. Now, we know there are some who will never search their conscience. For heaven's sake, we had 3 Republicans yesterday who met with the defense team just to kind of help them out. That's an interesting role for a juror, to also become an advisor to the defense. And when you see and learn something like that, it really should make your blood boil. The question is there anyone left who was on the side that this was an unconstitutional proceeding, where they would be so moved by the arguments of the managers that they would actually change their votes to get to the 17 Republicans who must join the Democrats to convict? I don't know that that is possible. I think the person, and I'm not a political analyst, but you'll hear it from the political analyst, the person to watch, of course, is Mitch McConnell, because he really does have a stake in the game. And it's not just some re-election sometime in the distant future, but it also was the fact of his life. It's also the fact of his wife's resignation. It's also the fact of looking at the lives around them. So I think that the House managers were really trying to reach deep with that argument that you better be scared, because an acquittal here sets a really bad precedent. And it really, frankly, should frighten all of us about what could happen in the future.
It's you know, one of those, we're watching history unfold before our very eyes, and I just reminded our audience earlier that some of these senators were very willing to convict former President Bill Clinton over his actions in the Oval Office, and they're on the record as to the reasons why they chose to do that. For example, Senator Lindsey Graham, and here they're all falling back, which I suspect we're going to hear, Rikki and Anne-Marie, they're all falling back on the process, you know, as cover for deciding not to convict this president by saying that they don't believe it's constitutional. But of course, as we've argued, or as we've said on this air for the last week, the Senate has deemed it constitutional, but that's a whole other question to dig into. Rikki, have a nice weekend. Always love talking to you about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.